In the summer of 1867, in a remote farming community outside Sedalia, Missouri, 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell became the subject of the most disturbing medical case study ever documented in the American Midwest. Dr. Samuel Harding, the region's only physician, filled 3 leather-bound journals with observations of a child whose behavior defied every principle of human nature known to 19th-century medicine. The boy appeared normal, even charming to casual observers, but beneath his innocent exterior lay something that medical science of the era simply could not explain. For 6 months, 3 people died in accidents around Timothy Caldwell, along with dozens of farm animals found dead under mysterious circumstances. 11 people who had all, in some way, crossed paths with a child whose smile never reached his pale blue eyes. The official records were sealed by local authorities and hidden away for over a century, but the truth about Timothy Caldwell reveals a darkness that challenges everything we thought we knew about the capacity for evil in childhood. Before we continue with the story of Timothy Caldwell and the terror that gripped Sedalia County, if this story intrigues you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. And please, let us know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of mystery enthusiasts around the world. The events that would make Timothy Caldwell infamous began not with violence, but with loss. The Missouri of 1867 was a state still bleeding from the wounds of civil war. Towns like Sedalia had sent their young men to die on distant battlefields, leaving behind widows, orphans, and communities struggling to rebuild. The Caldwell farm, nestled in a valley 15 miles south of town, had once been prosperous. James and Martha Caldwell had built their homestead with dreams of raising cattle and corn, but those dreams died with James at the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861. Martha tried to maintain the farm alone, but consumption took her lungs in the bitter winter of 1865. Their son Thomas, barely 21, inherited land he couldn't work and debts he couldn't pay. When Thomas received word that his brother William had died at Andersonville prison, leaving behind a widow and 8-year-old son, he saw both burden and opportunity. The boy, Timothy, would need a home, and Thomas needed help with the endless work of farming. Thomas Caldwell was a hard man, made harder by war and loss. His wife, Sarah, had grown sharp-tongued and bitter during their childless years. Neither was particularly suited for raising a child, especially one who arrived at their door in the spring of 1866, carrying nothing but a small cloth bag and eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. Timothy Caldwell was small for his age, with pale skin that burned easily in the Missouri sun and blonde hair that his Aunt Sarah kept cut short to keep the lice away. He spoke little of his life before the farm, offering only fragments when pressed. His father had been a soldier, his mother had coughed blood. He had lived with neighbors for a while after she died. What struck adults most about Timothy was his politeness. He always said, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, ma'am." He never complained about work or punishment. He seemed in every way to be the model of a well-behaved child. Dr. Samuel Harding first encountered Timothy in June of 1866, when the boy accompanied his uncle to town for supplies. Harding, a graduate of the Missouri Medical College and one of the few formally trained physicians west of St. Louis, had developed a keen eye for reading people during his years treating both Union and Confederate soldiers. Something about the Caldwell boy unsettled him, though he couldn't identify what. The child was perfectly respectful, Harding would later write in his journal. He answered questions directly, maintained appropriate eye contact, and displayed none of the fidgeting or shyness typical of rural children encountering strangers. Yet I found myself deeply uncomfortable in his presence. His gaze held an intensity that seemed to suggest he was studying me with the same clinical interest that I typically reserved for my patients. The farming community around Sedalia was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. The Caldwell farm was isolated, but not so isolated that neighbors didn't notice things. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose property bordered the Caldwell land, would often see Timothy working in the fields or tending to the livestock. She remarked to her husband that the boy worked with unusual focus for a child his age, never seeming to tire, never stopping to play or rest, as children naturally do. It was like watching a little machine, she told her husband Samuel over dinner one evening. He'd work steady from sunrise to sunset, never complaining, never slowing down. Ain't natural for a boy to have no play in him at all. The Patterson farm kept chickens, and Eleanor noticed that her birds became agitated whenever Timothy was near the property line. They would cluster together, squawking and ruffling their feathers, refusing to venture close to the fence that separated the properties. Her husband dismissed it as coincidence, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the animals sensed something about the boy that humans missed. The first death occurred on a sweltering afternoon in August 1866. Little Mary Fletcher, age 5, was the daughter of the town blacksmith and known throughout the community for her bright laugh and tendency to wander. She had been playing near Willow Creek, a shallow stream that ran between several properties, including the Caldwell farm. Timothy found her body. He arrived at the Fletcher home just as the family was preparing for supper, his clothes damp and his face pale, with what appeared to be genuine distress. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious agitation. "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." The search party that rushed to the creek found Mary Fletcher face down in water barely 18 inches deep. Dr. Harding, summoned immediately, determined that the child had drowned, a tragic but not uncommon accident in rural areas where children played unsupervised near water. What troubled Harding was not the death itself, but Timothy's account of discovering the body. The boy provided an unusually detailed description of exactly where Mary had been found, the position of her body, and the condition of her clothing. When pressed about how he had come to be in that particular spot at that particular time, Timothy explained that he had been looking for a lost calf. The boy's recall was remarkably precise, Harding noted in his journal. He could describe the exact position of the deceased child's limbs, the way her dress had been caught on a submerged branch, even the color of the water around her face. Such attention to detail seemed unusual for a child who claimed to be frightened and upset by the discovery. Thomas Caldwell, when questioned, confirmed that one of their calves had indeed gone missing that morning and that he had sent Timothy to search the creek area. The calf was found 2 days later, healthy and grazing in a meadow nearly a mile from where Mary Fletcher had drowned. The Fletcher family, devastated by their loss, received Timothy's sympathy with gratitude. He had, after all, been the one to find their daughter and alert them immediately. At the funeral, Timothy sat quietly with his aunt and uncle, his head bowed respectfully throughout the service. When the family thanked him for his quick action in alerting them, he accepted their gratitude with appropriate solemnity. "I wish I could have found her sooner," he told Mary's father, his voice carrying just the right note of regret and sorrow. But Eleanor Patterson, watching from across the church, noticed something that nagged at her for days afterward. When Mary Fletcher's mother collapsed in grief during the service, when the sight of the small coffin reduced grown men to tears, Timothy Caldwell's expression never changed. His head was bowed in apparent sorrow, but when he thought no one was looking, his pale blue eyes remained dry and watchful, taking in every detail of the scene around him. The second death came 3 weeks later. Old Henrik Larsson, a Norwegian immigrant who had worked as a logger before arthritis forced him into retirement, was found at the bottom of a rocky outcrop known locally as Devil's Bluff. The bluff overlooked the creek where Mary Fletcher had drowned, and Henrik was known to climb there regularly to check on the wild beehives he tended. Once again, Timothy Caldwell was involved in the discovery. He had been walking home from town when he spotted something unusual at the base of the bluff. "I saw Mr. Larsson's hat caught on a thorn bush," Timothy told the gathering crowd. "I called out to him but got no answer, so I climbed down to look." Henrik Larsson was dead, his neck broken from what appeared to be a fall from the top of the 40-foot bluff. Dr. Harding's examination revealed that the old man had likely died instantly upon impact. The only unusual aspect of the scene was the presence of several dead bees scattered around the body. far more than would typically be found away from a hive. Mr. Larson knew those bluffs better than any man in the county, Samuel Patterson told Dr. Harding after the examination. He'd been climbing up there for 3 years, never had so much as a stumble. Don't make sense he'd fall now. Timothy, when questioned, suggested that perhaps the old man had been stung by bees and lost his footing. He was always talking about how angry they get when you disturb them, the boy said. Maybe they swarmed him and he got confused. Dr. Harding found Timothy's explanation plausible, but something about the scene bothered him. The dead bees were all clustered in a small area directly around Henrik's body. If the old man had disturbed a hive at the top of the bluff, there should have been more evidence of bee activity along his presumed path of flight and fall. Instead, it appeared as though the bees had somehow been concentrated around the impact site. When Harding climbed to the top of the bluff to examine the beehives, he found them intact and showing no signs of recent disturbance. The worker bees were active but not agitated, going about their normal business of gathering nectar from the late summer wildflowers. The third death shattered any illusions about coincidence. In September 1866, 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished while playing in the woods near his family's cabin. His body was found 4 days later in an abandoned well, nearly half a mile from where he had last been seen. Timothy Caldwell had volunteered to join the search party. For 3 days, Timothy searched alongside the adult volunteers, showing remarkable endurance for a child his age. He seemed to know the woods intimately, guiding searchers through areas that even long-time residents found difficult to navigate. When asked how he had learned the terrain so well, Timothy explained that he often explored the woods during his free time, looking for useful plants and herbs that his aunt could use for cooking and medicine. On the 4th day, Timothy appeared at the Mills cabin just after dawn. "I think I've found something," he told Jacob's father, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "There's an old well about a half-mile north of here. I heard what sounded like crying." The well was partially concealed by fallen logs and overgrown brush. Jacob Mills was at the bottom, alive but barely conscious, suffering from dehydration and exposure. Dr. Harding was summoned immediately, but the boy died within hours of being pulled from the well, his small body unable to recover from the ordeal. The child had been at the bottom of that well for nearly 4 days, Harding wrote in his journal. The fact that Timothy Caldwell was able to locate him in such an obscure location raises troubling questions. How extensive is the boy's knowledge of the local terrain? What other hidden dangers might he be aware of? More troubling still was Timothy's behavior during Jacob's final hours. While the Mills family maintained a vigil around their dying son, Timothy sat quietly in the corner of the cabin, apparently praying. But Dr. Harding, positioned where he could observe the boy without being noticed, saw something that deeply disturbed him. Timothy wasn't praying. His lips were moving, but his eyes were fixed on Jacob Mills with an intensity that seemed almost scientific. He appeared to be cataloging every detail of the dying child's condition. The labored breathing, the pale skin, the way consciousness flickered in and out. When Jacob finally died, Timothy's expression showed no grief or shock. Instead, there was something that Harding could only describe as satisfaction. After the funeral, Dr. Harding made an excuse to visit the abandoned well where Jacob had been found. The site troubled him for reasons he couldn't articulate. The well was indeed well hidden, concealed by natural debris that would have taken considerable effort to move. Yet Timothy had claimed to hear crying from this location, a claim that seemed improbable given the depth of the well and the amount of brush covering it. As Harding examined the scene more carefully, he noticed something that the initial rescue party had missed in their urgency to save Jacob Mills. Around the rim of the well, the debris had been arranged with unusual precision. Logs and branches that should have fallen randomly showed signs of deliberate placement, creating a natural-looking camouflage that would be nearly impossible to spot unless one knew exactly where to look. The implications were too disturbing to voice aloud, but Harding could not shake the suspicion that Jacob Mills had not simply fallen into the well. Someone had placed him there, and someone had carefully concealed the location until the boy was too weak to survive rescue.